Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
Alright, people. The aftermath of Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall, is still lingering around the place. There is still a lot of talk about that, and even here, I have a report here from the Mail Sport saying that Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has revealed he's now sent a letter to the police about the result of the fight. Hoyle is an MP from Crowley, where Catterall lives, and he said that the Minister from Sport is looking into this. And I'd planned on doing this last week. Obviously, I was away last week. Time was just so fragile in the days until I was leaving that I just didn't get a chance to make it. But we're going to make it now, because I want to talk about Josh Taylor, his career, how we've got to this point, and kind of go in depth, because I've seen pretty much, well, not all, but most of I was going to call him Jack Catterall there, Josh Taylor's fights. And I thought, why not? Haven't done one of these in about a month or two. Let's just do it. Let's go. Let's ask the question, what the F is the deal with Josh Taylor? Alright, so Josh Taylor as an amateur was quite useful. Like, he did do a lot as an amateur. BoxRec, right? So BoxRec have Josh Taylor listed as having 73 amateur fights. Now, BoxRec, they don't count early amateur fights or stuff like that. They kind of tend to count it when you're kind of around about kind of intermediate, kind of senior level in around then. So Josh Taylor, the first fight they have listed for him here is a loss, 2007 British Junior semi-final against James Dickens, and yes, that is Jazza Dickens for anyone wondering. Lost to James Dickens again, or Jazza Dickens should say, in the 2008 final, made it to the final that year. Who else? Because there's names on here that I do recognise. Lost to Joe Cordina. He was having some bad luck in those British youth finals. That's 3 in a row he's lost. Joe Cordina, he lost then. Then he started going onto the kind of Commonwealth scene. So got as far as the 2010 Commonwealth quarter final. Lost to a guy called Jay Bagwani. Did he have any fights as a pro? No, he's never had a fight as a pro. And, you know, the career keeps going. There's names here like Thomas Stalker, who I do recognise, lost actually in the finals to him. Fought Martin J. Ward, you may recognise him. James Friars, the fighter I recognise, I think is Larry James Friars, his full name. He's basically a journeyman, but in the pro games. But as an amateur, he was alright. He was alright as an amateur. Lost to Daniel Lusinov in the preliminaries of the AIBA World Championships in 2011. Again, names I recognise. The London Olympic Test Event quarterfinals. And actually, he made it all the way to the final. Actually, won the final. And this was it. Listen to this for in the space of 3 days. Because bear in mind, the amateurs, you could be fighting every other day pretty much. Listen to this for 3 wins. And he won all these. He beat Jamal Herring, Jeff Horn, and Anthony Yigit in 3 days. Former world champion. Yigit was a world title challenger. He might have been European champion, but Yigit's a European level fighter. But nevertheless, to beat the 3 of them in 3 days, I know you're doing 3-minute rounds. You do take that into consideration, but still, there's some names there. And, you know, we go up the ladder. I mean, Josh Taylor's crowning achievement was the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Won that. You know, beat a guy called Jonas. Is that his real name? Yeah, it is. Junior Jonas. Never had a pro fight. Haven't heard of him now as an amateur, I have to say. Also beat Sam Maxwell and Zach Davis along the way. So that's pretty much... There's names in Josh Taylor's amateur career, or amateur resume, I should say, who you would know. But it's mainly the pro game. Now, obviously, we know Josh Taylor is... Well, he's officially 19-0. I think he should be 18-1, as many other people do. But nevertheless, we'll talk about his career. And... this is going to be an interesting one, because normally when I do these, there are obviously exceptions, of course, but normally when I do these, you're kind of talking about early fights in their careers, you know, journeyman, this, that, and the other. Josh Taylor's career, to say this guy was fast-tracked is an understatement. I mean, the resume he has, okay, look, take the Jack Catterall fight out of the equation. You know, we all think I'd say probably 99% of us think he lost that fight, but still, some of the names he has and what he's done at and the risks he's taken, because he's taken risks well in his career as well, and to just have these names on it for such a a guy who's not, had many pro fights. It's quite incredible, really, when you think about it. So he made his pro debut against the guy called Wash Archibald. He stopped this guy in 2 rounds. Interesting one. This was on the undercard of... This was actually in Texas. It was on the undercard of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and... I forget the guy's name. Oh, his name escapes me. I'll actually have to box record now because that's going to annoy me. Marco Reyes. Yeah, that was the fight where he headbutted Reyes deliberately a couple of times. Chavez Jr. looked horrible in that fight. But interestingly, it was also on the undercard of Carl Frampton versus... I think it's Alejandro Gonzalez or something his name was. He's now dead, RIP. But that was a fight where Frampton was down twice in the first round, rallied back to win. So when Taylor turned pro, he turned pro with the McGuigans. He actually signed with Cyclone, which is Barry McGuigan's promotional company. I don't really think that's, if anything, I don't even think that's doing anything anymore. But they had a deal, it was around about the time they had a deal with Channel 5. So Taylor was fighting. That actually was on Sky Sports. I remember that card, because that was back when Sky Sports were still showing PBC cards, because that was on the Al Heyman card for those who don't know. And they were showing that over in the UK. I remember that was actually on Sky. And then his second pro fight, he fought a guy called Adam Mate. Now, Adam Mate is a guy, he's a journeyman, and he's not a particularly durable journeyman. He's kind of a guy who, he's not the most durable. He's got a little... How do I say it? Like, he's not garbage in that regard. Like, as some journeymen who aren't durable are, they just hit them and they fall over. This guy, you wouldn't be putting him in straight away if you were an underdeveloped pro, but he's not anything special to write home about. And Josh Taylor took care of him in a round. Daniel Mikowski, is probably how you pronounce that, got rid of him in 45 seconds. That was actually quite impressive. That was on the undercard of Conrad Cummins versus Alfredo May. I think that was actually up in Belfast in the waterfront. So yeah, this was really extremely early on in Josh Taylor's career. He was going through these guys. Like, these guys didn't have the greatest resumes. Like, that Adam Mate guy was 17-5. This guy 14-9. Miguel Mena 13-11. So wasn't exactly fighting the cream of the crop, shall we say. He did then fight on the undercard. I actually remember this one as well. On the undercard of Carl Frampton versus Leo Santa Cruz. That was obviously over in America as well. Josh Taylor was fighting on... There was a lot of people on that card. Mikey Garcia, Amanda Serrano, Paulie Malignaggi, Tony Harrison. It was a good few. You forget some of these early PBC cards they were doing. They had some names on them. And he fought a guy who was 7-14, Evenchi Dixon. And this was kind of the last... This was only Josh Taylor's 6th pro fight. Right? It was only... For someone who's only had 6 pro fights, next fight he's going straight into the deep end. This was on Channel 5, remember. This is one of the first times I really got a good look at Josh Taylor. And he fought a guy called Dave Ryan. The Dave Ryan had been Commonwealth champion before. He was 17-9 at the time. Dave Ryan was... When I say... Yeah, we'll call him a journeyman. Like, realistically, he was a bit better than that, but he had a journeyman's resume. But he was durable. Let's think about Ryan. At the time, he'd only ever been stopped once, and that was by a guy called John Wayne Hibbert. And that was, I believe it was an injury. And Ryan was known, although he didn't have a massive KO ratio, like, example, out of his 17 wins, he only had 4 knockouts. The people who fought him all reported him to be extremely heavy-handed. So he was one of them guys, and there's a lot of journeymen like that, funny enough, who... They don't have, like, a good example, and this isn't even a journeyman, but someone like Bob Ajasafi. Or if you want to go down the journeyman route, Darnell Boone, they don't have massive KO records. Like, when you're looking at their wins, it's not like 10 wins, 10 knockouts. It could be something like 10, 11 wins, 3 knockouts. But if you put them in the ring with anyone, even if they feel it on the glove, they're telling you they hit hard. Remember Bob Ajasafi dropped Tony Bellew quite badly, quite heavily actually, when they fought at light heavyweight many years ago. And, Darnell Boone, I mean, Kovalev, he's dropped. Ward, he's dropped. Nearly, like, that. Ward was hurt more in that fight than he was against Kovalev. Make no mistake about it, he was hurt more against Darnell Boone than he was against Kovalev. And obviously Boone knocked out Adonis Stevenson in 6 rounds. Great little shot, actually, he knocked him out. It was a one-punch shot, and Adonis Stevenson does even used to fight. I know I'm going a bit off topic here, but Adonis Stevenson used to fight on the inside a little bit more. He became a real long-range fighter after that. He was always wary after that. He obviously avenged the loss, but it goes to show some of these journeymen, although they might not have the record to suggest it, they can bang. And Josh Taylor, to say he put on a clinic in this fight was an understatement. Bear in mind, this was only his 7th fight as a pro, and it was round about this time, we're talking October 2016. This is when O'Hara Davis started getting he was making a lot of noise. He was fighting on Sky Show, was promoted by Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, and he was the type of fighter that Eddie Hearn wanted. Davis didn't have an extensive amateur background. He turned pro originally with Tunde Ajayi. I think he was training with Tony Sims at the time. But he was loud. He was abrasive. He was doing things just purely out of impulse. I remember Eddie Hearn he jokingly said to O'Hara Davis, you need to change up your style. Jokingly he said it, and Davis came in with blonde hair. O'Hara Davis was coming to the ring with the Undertaker team. He was giving it all. I think he even confronted Mayweather at one stage. So Davis was making a name for himself. And to be fair to him, if you'd seen O'Hara Davis pre-Josh Taylor, I know some people weren't impressed with him, but the punching power and just the sheer confidence of him was something that was, a lot of people were taking note. And I remember Hatman at the time, watching his videos back then. Prior to this fight being announced, he was actually always favouring O'Hara Davis, as I was myself, for my sins, to beat Josh Taylor, because I guess, although in that Dave Ryan fight he looked fantastic and did a great job stopping Dave Ryan, I guess we kind of bought into the confidence and the punching power of O'Hara Davis at the time, which we'll get to because they did end up fighting. We will get to that in a second. But Josh Taylor moved on from that. Then he actually fought a guy called Alfonso Oliveira. Now this was on the undercard of Frampton versus Santa Cruz 2. Now I remember watching this fight live at the time. And yeah, Josh Taylor didn't look spectacular. And bear in mind, this was a guy whose record was 8-2-1. And yeah, Josh Taylor didn't look spectacular. I don't remember the ins and outs as to why he didn't. I think maybe he said that, maybe it was the jet lag or something like that. He was fighting in the MGM Grand. And he didn't look good at all. He lost a couple of rounds in that fight and he lost his KO streak, but obviously he won the fight. It was an 8-rounder. And that, again, at that time we were talking about, well, I wasn't on YouTube with them, but we're hearing a lot of talk about O'Hara Davis, Josh Taylor. O'Hara Davis, Josh Taylor. And that performance really did switch a lot of people on the O'Hara Davis side, because Davis had just won a WBC silver title against an Italian fighter, Andrea Scarpa. His name just came to me there. There was talk of him fighting Derry Matthews. He ended up fighting him, I believe, on the Bellew Hay undercard. Derry Matthews had seen much better days at the time, but the swagger and the noise O'Hara Davis was making, as I said, a lot of people were really starting to take notice, and he was looking impressive along the way. Josh Taylor then had an interim fight in March of that year. Again, that was with the McGuigans. He fought a guy called Warren Jubbett, who was 26-4 at the time. Josh Taylor was able to stop him. He didn't really do much. He was a South African fighter, but he wasn't anything to write home about. He'd lost to lesser opponents than Josh Taylor. And then it was announced July the 8th, up there in Scotland. I believe this was in Glasgow. Yes, it was. It was going to be on Channel 5. Eddie Hearn was going to be in attendance, but we were going to have a clash. Commonwealth title on the line for Josh Taylor. WBC silver title on the line for O'Hara Davis. Josh Taylor, O'Hara Davis, they're going to fight. They're going to meet. And I was really excited about this fight, because I genuinely thought we were going to see fireworks. We see one guy who's good at long range, tremendous punching power, and we also have a guy in Josh Taylor who has power, has definitely got good power, much better mid to close range. But Josh Taylor more natural at 140 pounds than O'Hara Davis was. O'Hara Davis actually came up through the weight. So originally when he turned over, he was 135 pounds. And he'd only kind of in the last year or so gone to 140, whereas Josh Taylor was a solid 140 pounder. The amateur background that Josh Taylor had, the better technique that Josh Taylor had against the sheer punching power and confidence of O'Hara Davis. I went into this fight genuinely, I will admit it, hand on my heart, I picked O'Hara Davis to win the fight. If I'd have been on YouTube and I'd done a prediction video, yes, I would have said I think O'Hara Davis is going to win the fight. I thought it would have been competitive, but boy was I wrong. I mean, Josh Taylor showed that he wasn't just better than O'Hara Davis, he was in a different stratosphere to O'Hara Davis. It was apparent from very early on in the fight that Josh Taylor was just the substantially better fighter in that fight, and he picked O'Hara Davis apart. He bossed it at mid to close range. O'Hara Davis could never set himself. He looked gangly. He was using the shoulder roll, which just... O'Hara Davis was trying to emulate Mayweather with the shoulder roll, but the problem was he couldn't do it. I mean, the shoulder roll is not exactly straightforward to do. I mean, Mayweather makes it look easy because he's tremendously skilled and he's honed that over God knows how many years. It's not something that you could just pick up, you know, that sort of way. It's not something like that. So the shoulder roll wasn't working for O'Hara Davis, and Josh Taylor was absolutely picking him apart. In the third round, O'Hara Davis took a knee in the third round off a Josh Taylor jab, so it obviously showed that Josh Taylor was finding holes. He was picking O'Hara Davis apart. I think O'Hara Davis was starting to feel sorry for himself then after that point. The end came in the 7th round. Lovely counter right hook from Josh Taylor. Put O'Hara Davis on the canvas. He went down and just kind of sat just plumb down on the canvas. Got back up. Josh Taylor went in for the kill and O'Hara Davis quit. By his own admission, he said he couldn't breathe out of his nose or something like that. And I remember the commentator, I forget who the commentator was, but all I remember him saying was after that really loudly, and the arena was going ballistic, was just Josh Taylor proves his point and that Josh Taylor reaches for the sky. I remember that. And at ringside as well, who was doing punditry for this fight was Ricky Burns. Ricky Burns, obviously 3-weight world champion, you know, hell of a fighter from Scotland as well. Now at this stage, Ricky Burns had just lost to Julius Ndongo. This was back in April. So people were kind of talking at the time, you know, Battle of Scotland, you know. You could have Ricky Burns, the old guard, versus Josh Taylor, the new kid on the block. Could we have that fight? And genuinely, I genuinely thought we probably would have got that fight next. I genuinely did. As it happened, we got Miguel Vasquez. Now, Miguel Vasquez, he had 5 losses at the time. And some people thought as though he was on his way out. Former world champion Miguel Vasquez, a good fighter in his own right, very good fighter. But many people felt that he was on his way out. This was just after Josh Taylor fought O'Hara Davis. Well, Miguel Vasquez was many things, but on his way out was not one of them. Because Miguel Vasquez showed that he is still a world-class fighter. But Josh Taylor showed that he is the fighter we thought he was. He is there. He is at that level, and he is about that, because Josh Taylor actually stopped Miguel Vasquez. How many fighters have stopped Miguel Vasquez? Not many. You know, not many. I'll put it like this. O'Hara Davis fought Miguel Vasquez in 2019. So you're talking, 2 years removed. And O'Hara Davis, he lost that fight. Even though he got the decision, it was Ian John Lewis, who I'll talk about at the end of this video, who gave the decision. He lost the fight. Simple as. He lost the fight. You know, Miguel Vasquez won the fight. Miguel Vasquez has gone on to get robbed again against guys like Lewis Ritson. He's fighting Gary Cully this weekend. Now that should be an interesting one. Will Cully be able to stop him? Depends what he has left. But that's an interesting fight. You'll get a video about that whole card in the next day or so. But Josh Taylor stopped him. Only the second man to actually stop Miguel Vasquez. Big statement. Next fight was a bit of a letdown. Winston Kapos. Now, Kapos was 30-3-5. Complete mismatch. Josh Taylor beat the living crap out of him. Stopped him in 3 rounds. Honestly, there isn't much to say about that fight. There really isn't. I think he stopped him with body shots, if my memory serves me correctly. But then, 23rd of June 2018, Josh Taylor was taking a step up. A big step up. A big one. He was going in there against former world champion Victor Postal. Now, Victor Postal's record, 29-1. Right? Do you know who that one loss was to? It was on points to Terence Crawford in 140-pound unification. Terence Crawford, who would go on to become the undisputed champion at 140 pounds. This is who Josh Taylor was fighting. How many fights into Josh Taylor? This was his 13th pro fight. Quite impressive. And this was not a Victor Postal who had regressed, who had seen better days. This was still a fairly useful Victor Postal. Make no mistake about it. Still well in there in the 140-pound division. Now, the scorecards for this fight are extremely wide. Extremely wide. You have two you have one scorecard of 170, 110, 118, 110, and 119, 109. Victor Postal was down in the 10th round. Now, Josh Taylor was the winner. He was the deserved winner. But these scorecards are absurd. I don't know whether it was the fans, because this was in the SSE Arena, where Josh Taylor had a very controversial decision, which we'll get to now in a few minutes. But Josh Taylor was the winner of the fight, but it was a much closer fight than the scorecards would have you suggest. This is one of the reasons why I say when you see real wide scorecards like that and you're looking at a fight that you haven't maybe watched, it does tend to kind of give you a false sense of what actually happened in the fight, because it was a much closer fight than this. But as I said, Josh Taylor was the deserved winner. And then Josh Taylor ended up going into the World Boxing Super Series. This was at 140 pounds. Who was in that series? You had Josh Taylor, you had Regis Prograis, you had Ryan Martin, obviously, Ivan Baranchyk, but you had other people as well. I'm just trying to think who you had. I think you had Terry Flanagan, you had something Relic, the guy who got robbed against Ricky Burns, and you also had Troyanovsky, the Russian fighter. That was there was some good fighters in there, but Regis Prograis, Josh Taylor were the two main ones. Oh, you had Anthony Idjit as well, I think, in there as well, and they were the guys. So Josh Taylor went in there, first fight, undefeated at the time, Ryan Martin. Now, this was a bizarre fight. It wasn't for a world title as of yet, but this fight happened in Glasgow, Scotland. Actually, Ryan Burnett fought Anita Nair in the undercard, and Anita Nair stopped Ryan Burnett. Ryan Burnett blew his back out in that fight. And actually, that was the fight where Zach Parker got that robbery over Darrell Williamson. But Ryan Martin fought a very bizarre fight. He barely threw any punches. He was trained by Abel Sanchez for that fight. Barely threw a punch and was stopped in 7 rounds. I don't know whether it was the fact that Josh Taylor was just significantly better, or that his punches, maybe he hit harder than he expected, whether Ryan Martin froze. I really don't know what went wrong, but it was a very bizarre performance from Ryan Martin. He didn't do anything, and ultimately was taken out in 7 rounds. I still remember watching that fight and still not kind of understanding what was going on, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, Josh Taylor moved on. He got his world title next fight against Ivan Baranchyk. Alright, this turned out to be a much harder fight than I expected and a lot of other people expected. Right, Baranchyk from Belarus, undefeated at the time. This was before he'd had that war with Jose Zepeda, which pretty much destroyed his career in terms of he's got nothing left now. But Baranchyk was undefeated, coming off a win over Anthony Idjit. Yeah, he was the guy who beat Anthony Idjit. So this was actually I believe it was for a vacant title. I don't think this title was owned by anyone. Now, interestingly, Taylor missed weight going into this fight originally. He was 2 ounces over the weight limit. And the reason for that, funny enough, is because they weighed him in incorrectly. So he came in 2 ounces over the weight limit, but they actually said he hit weight. And bad news for Josh Taylor was when they said he actually hit weight, he started drinking, as you would, because you think you've made weight, so I'll have a drink. And then they actually had to come and say, actually, you didn't. And by then he'd already had the drink, so he had to go and actually go back on an exercise bike and get the weight off. He ended up making weight. There was no serious harm done, and very competitive fight. Baranchyk was very game. He was down twice in the 6th round, and I did think Josh Taylor would get him out of there after that, because they were quite good knockdowns. But Baranchyk, he grit his teeth, he held on, and there's 2 scorecards here, 115 and 111, and 117 and 109. I would say the 115 111 scorecard was probably the closest to what we were seeing. A very competitive fight, but Josh Taylor, the deserved winner, he got his world title. And then we went on to Sky Box Office, the final. Regis Prograis had won against Terry Flanagan on points. He'd knocked out Relic, I think it was in 6 or 7 rounds. And this was a really, really good fight. This was a really, one of the fights of the year in 2019. The build up to that was really stemming from Chisora, because Chisora was actually, believe it or not, Chisora was meant to fight Joseph Parker on that card, and then obviously Joseph Parker, inspired by Tobey Maguire, got bit by a spider, and he pulled out. So Chisora ended up fighting David Price, and famously at the press conference he was complaining that, why are these 2 guys in the main event, not me? But the build up to that fight was actually quite good. You had Josh Taylor really putting it on Regis Prograis for wearing the sunglasses indoors, and Prograis going back. The build up to that was good, and the fight itself was excellent. Absolutely excellent. A lot of people have conflicting scorecards. Some people felt it was a draw. Some people felt Josh Taylor won. Some people felt Regis Prograis just nicked it. Me personally, I watched that fight live and I watched it again a few times. I've always had Josh Taylor winning the fight. Very close I might add, but I always felt Josh Taylor just nicked the fight. The scorecards were a draw, 114, 114, 115, 113 to Taylor, and obviously this one was a very wide scorecard. This was a bizarre one, 117, 112. I certainly didn't see that type of fight. I saw that, because that implies that Prograis won only 3 rounds and he gave him 1 round even. It wasn't that type of fight, not even remotely like that type of fight. It was much, much, much closer. But Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis and his WBA title on top of that, so we're now talking about a unified world champion. The next course of action, obviously, at that stage, because in 2019, Jose Ramirez unified with Maurice Hooker, so he actually became the WBA or WBC and WBO champion at 140 pounds. All right, Josh Taylor ended up signing a contract to sign with Top Rank. Top Rank promote Jose Ramirez, so undisputed at 140 is looking extremely close. Josh Taylor had one slight issue. He had a mandatory for the IBF that he needed to get rid of, and the IBF, we all know, sticklers for their mandatories. He was going to fight an undefeated fighter called Abnoun Konsal. I remember this fight well. I think this was in your call. It was behind closed doors because obviously it was in 2020. Josh Taylor won first round knockout. This was, oh yes, actually, I must point out that it was at this time that Josh Taylor actually started training with Ben Davison. Might have even, I can't remember the exact time when he left Shane McGuigan. It might have even been not long after the Prograis fight. It might not have been not long after that. But at this time, Frampton was having his issues with the McGuigans. The McGuigan stable was kind of changing a bit, and obviously Frampton was quite close with Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor had signed out as turned pro with the McGuigans. And it sure as hell wasn't animosity like Frampton. I mean, Frampton really doesn't like the McGuigans. But Taylor did his own thing, went to Ben Davison. The decision was kind of met with a lot of kind of head scratching. Some people felt that this was a very poor decision because Shane McGuigan, love him or hate him, is an excellent trainer. He's much more proven than Ben Davison. And a lot of people felt this wasn't a good decision. Now, Josh Taylor, we didn't really get a chance to see anything in this fight because it was over in like 2 and a bit minutes. But we saw Josh Taylor get a nice little knockout over this guy. You know, he's actually not fought since then, actually, funny enough. This was over a year ago. Well over a year ago. It'll be 2 years now, come September. So, Josh Taylor, we moved on from that. He needed to get out of the way he did, and it was talk about next fight. Are we going to get the Jose Ramirez fight? The answer, of course, was yes, we were. May 22nd. We were going to, in Las Vegas of all places, we were going to get the Jose Ramirez fight, and it was going to be for undisputed. I was looking forward to this fight. I know a lot of other people were looking forward to this fight. I was really excited. Ramirez, excellent fighter. He'd had a few fights where he maybe didn't look amazing, but in his biggest fights, he certainly looked good. And he was going to go in there with Josh Taylor. Now, the scorecards for this fight were extremely bizarre. I mean, they were all 114, 112. Bear in mind, Josh Taylor dropped Jose Ramirez twice in the 6th and 7th round. The 7th round was a heavy knockdown. It was an uppercut. It was a heavy knockdown. And I was actually surprised Ramirez, again, showed heart, was able to get through that. But it does have you wonder. Like, that fight essentially would have been a draw without them knockdowns. And let's say, for argument's sake, because I think it might have been the 6th round, Ramirez was actually doing some good work. Let's say he'd not been dropped in the 6th round and he won that round, he would have won this fight. Now, Josh Taylor, although Ramirez was game and he definitely won rounds, this was not as close a fight as these scorecards suggest. I don't think you could give Ramirez 6 rounds in this fight. It was a Josh Taylor fight, done very well, and, you know, boxed absolutely brilliantly. So Josh Taylor, in doing this, became undisputed at 140 pounds, but also the first fighter from the United Kingdom in the 4-belt era to become undisputed champion. Josh Taylor, I don't feel, gets the recognition he deserves. You know, you don't see him on some of these, you know, talk shows, you know, on some of these. I'd say that Josh Taylor strikes me as someone where I think even if he was offered the opportunity to be on them shows, I don't think he would probably take it unless it was something that he really liked. And there's nothing wrong with that, to be honest with you. I mean, like, I can't. If he was offered to go on sort of show, like, I mean, God knows what, like, I think he's already been on a League of Their Own, but something like that, and he said no, I wouldn't blame him, to be honest with you. But I think he's already been on that show. Nevertheless, Josh Taylor wanted to have one more fight, so he said anyway, at £140. All right, his mandatory then with the WBO was called, and actually his mandatory with the WBO was called prior to the Jose Ramirez fight. He just stepped aside, and this was going to be Jack Catterall. Now, the original date for this was, I believe, December 18th. It was actually going to clash with the Joseph Parker-Derek Chisora rematch. But obviously, Josh Taylor suffered a slight knee injury. I believe it was a knee injury anyway, in training. So this fight got pushed back. Got pushed back to February the 26th. Jack Catterall versus Josh Taylor. A lot of us were very dismissive of Jack Catterall. It was a homecoming for Josh Taylor with all the belts, all the marbles, full arena, everyone singing Josh Taylor's name, the return of the King of Scotland. Well, this fight was a strange fight. Josh Taylor was outboxed, and Josh Taylor is one of, if not the, and I still would consider him probably the best pure boxer in Britain. You know, just pure boxing ability. You know, take this fight out of the equation and look at his skill set. Josh Taylor would still be number one in my opinion, you know. But in this fight, Jack Catterall was outboxing Josh Taylor. He was landing with so much regularity with his left hand. He was out jabbing Josh Taylor. The first couple of rounds, it was difficult to find rounds to give to Josh Taylor, even if you were being generous, which is why it makes it all the more bizarre that this fight, not only that it was a split decision, but that it was given to Josh Taylor. And the really worrying thing here, alright, is that Ian John Lewis, and this was a fight where Josh Taylor had points deducted. This was a fight where he was dropped in the 8th round. And Ian John Lewis gave this to Josh Taylor 114, 111. That's implying that Jack Catterall only won 4 rounds. I believe in the first couple of rounds, he gave them to Josh Taylor. Bizarre, shocking, disgraceful. Josh Taylor won this fight. Actually, he got the decision. And this sparked a lot of controversy. It's still going on now. Probably, and I've been watching boxing religiously for about a decade now. It's right up there with one of the, maybe even the worst decision I've seen in boxing. Absolutely crazy. Subsequently, Josh Taylor announced after the fight that it would probably be his last fight at £140. He also stated that he feels as though he's done enough. He did enough to win the fight, and that he doesn't see the point in having a rematch. Personally, I would like to see a rematch in this because I feel Jack Catterall extremely hard done by. And I didn't pick Jack Catterall to win this fight. I picked Josh Taylor. And yeah, it is not... that fight just left such a horrible taste in the mouth of many boxing fans. So much so that what I talked about at the start of this video, Speaker of the House of Commons Sir Lindsay Hoyle has revealed he sent a letter to the police about Josh Taylor Jack Catterall result. I don't know what they're going to try and get by having that letter to police, whether they're looking to investigate the possibility of corruption, could potentially be, if they're looking to see if they can get something done in boxing to help with these kind of things. I believe that we need a lot of help in the sport of boxing with regards poor decisions like this. And I said to you, Ian John Lewis' scorecard was bizarre. It's not the first time he's delivered some absolutely monstrous scorecards. A good example would be, well, 2 examples I'll give you would be the O'Hara Davis versus Miguel Vasquez fight. Miguel Vasquez clearly won the fight. He outworked O'Hara Davis, and Ian John Lewis was not only referee, he was the scoring referee. Because it was a non-title fight, so in the UK referees tend to score them, which I think is very outdated. I don't think it should be in general. Like, even if they're given the right decisions, I think it's very outdated. I think they need to get rid of that. But he scored that fight to O'Hara Davis. Ray Vargas, when he fought Gavin McDonnell, that was a couple of years ago now, But that was a fight that Ray Vargas won handily, won it comfortably, and Ian John Lewis scored that fight a draw. I mean, that if you've ever seen Ray Vargas versus Gavin McDonald, this was not a competitive fight. Ray Vargas did everything but stop Gavin McDonald, and somehow Ian John Lewis is scoring a draw. Bizarre. And as I said, not the first time he's returned some very, very bizarre scorecards. And when I was in the UK last week, on Friday, I went out to Luton, met Jamie, Punch Perfect Boxing, great guy. We went and had pizza, it was nice. But we were talking about this, and we were talking about like what can be done. And he touched on something very interesting, and he said that the British Boxing Board of Control don't receive any government backing, any government funding. So when these judges are coming to do their job essentially and score a fight, referee a fight, a lot of times the promoter was putting them up in these hotels. So, because I know, you know, staying in hotels, travelling, it is expensive. You know, if you're someone who lives, we'll say, in London, and you're going to Glasgow, you could pay for a flight up there, or you could drive. Either way, it's expensive. You're paying for your accommodation and your food. Again, expensive. If you've got a promoter who's going to do all that for you, who's going to wine and dine you, it can sweat subconsciously. I mean, if you talk about a nip and tuck close round, where you can't really split them, but you're a judge, and you're like, I can't really split them. That hotel was very nice. Had a lovely steak dinner. And breakfast this morning was amazing. 10-9, house fighter. I'm not saying for definite that's what goes on, but it does, maybe on a subconscious level, that is something that's going on. I think that we need to get away from that, obviously. It was Teddy Atlas who said that boxing is the only sport where the night before a fight, the officials will be having dinner with the promoters. And he's right in that regard. That needs to change in order to at least have some more confidence that we're not going to get decisions like we've seen with Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall. I believe we need to see something like that. I also believe these judges and referees at that need to be scrutinised. They need to be. You know, at the end of the day, it's the same names we see. Again, this is not a British Boxing Board of Control issue necessarily. Obviously, it happened to their jurisdiction, this Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall performance. But, you know, dodgy decisions happen all over the sport of boxing. I mean, some of them, I remember Tyen Booth saying that you see decisions like that on TV. Imagine what goes on small hall shows, and can't argue with that. But for sure, we need to find a way to help. There's something needs to be done. I don't even know the ins and outs, but I do think, and obviously it's wishful thinking the government is going to fund boxing in the UK or the British Boxing Board of Control. It's just not going to happen. Boxing is one of them sports that gets, you know, it's not like football or darts. It's one of them sports that kind of, they look at it and kind of, really, boxing? That's the kind of way they do it in the UK. But that was Josh Taylor's most recent fight. Lest we forget, this is more a conversation about Josh Taylor's career. In terms of what Josh Taylor's going to do next, I mean, you got to admit, for 19 fights, it's a very impressive resume. You know, it is. Whether you like the guy or not, I mean, like, I'll give you an example. 26-0, 26-0, 16-0, 24-0, 19-0, 22-0, 29-1. That is Josh Taylor's last 7 fights. That's impressive. That is impressive. 1 loss in that time, as a whole in their record. That is very impressive. And you know, these are good fighters. Victor Postal, a good fighter. Ryan Martin, meh. Baranchek was good before the Zepeda fight. Prograis, excellent fighter. Just a shame he's fighting Tyrone McKenna. Consong, okay, well, we'll just casually scribble that one out. Not to say he's not a terrible fighter, but he's definitely not a world beater. Ramirez, excellent fighter. Catterall, excellent fighter. Josh Taylor is beating these guys, albeit you could put a little asterisk against the Catterall one, but it is a fantastic resume to do it all in 19 fights, and he's looking likely that he's going to move up to 147 pounds. I don't know how he's going to fare at that weight division, but what I do know is that he's going into that division, I want to say, near the end of Errol Spence and Terence Crawford's run in said division. I mean, Crawford's been talking about potentially fighting, the winner of Castano Charlo at 154 pounds. Spence is probably a fight or two away from actually going up. I mean, I'm amazed he's still doing 147, to be honest with you. I mean, he's been massive at that weight for years. But I would envision that those two wouldn't be sticking around for very long, in which case Josh Taylor, he could end up fighting for a vacant title. It doesn't get any easier because you got guys like Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz who are tremendous fighters in their own right, and I think they're going to be flying the flag for welterweight boxing in the next few years. But there is opportunities there at 147 pounds, and I suspect Josh Taylor will have some success. I think that the problem with so many boxing fans, they're very reactionary. So when you see a performance like he had against Jack Catterall and a decision like that, you instantly think you're going to be garbage at 147 without looking at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture tells me that Josh Taylor will be successful at 147 pounds. Will he be as successful as 140? I doubt that very much. I'd be very surprised if he unifies at 147 pounds, as in undisputed. But do I expect him to win a world title? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. At 147 pounds, at some point. And we will watch the space with that. We will watch the space with the goings on with the Jack Catterall fight. And we will leave that video here. I hope you enjoyed it. If there was things about Taylor's career that you didn't know, I hope maybe a few little snippets I chucked in there that maybe you enjoyed it. And maybe you know things about Josh Taylor that you didn't then. And yeah, we talked about his career, his fights. It's been fun. I love doing these. I love talking. Because the thing I love about doing these is that it brings back boxing memories. When you see fights and you were thinking like, oh yeah, that was on that undercard. And oh yeah, that happened. And in the build up to it, this happened. That's why I love doing this. And I always keep doing it. I love doing these. And there's always a fighter who I have to say, what the F's to deal with. There's always got to be a fighter like that. Whether it be past or present, I still got to do Adrian Broner. I have to do a WTF on Adrian Broner. Have to. And I will. I will get to that, but I have to do one on him because that is like, that's just like, where do you start with Adrian Broner? That's like bleeding Jeremy Kyle and Jerry Springer all rolled into one. It's like the love child of Jeremy Kyle and Jeremy Springer talking about Adrian Broner's career. Jesus Christ, that's going to be fun. But lads and lads, I'll leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you could, smash the like button. If you haven't already, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. Help your boy out. For now, lads and lads, I'll talk to you. Peace.